Hey everyone, Jamari here with another video on BVA. I just got done watching Swamp Thing and it is another great hit for DC streaming service. They come time and time again with amazing content and great shows, and they got me fully invested. I'm not 100% familiar with Swamp Thing, and I wasn't familiar with Doom Patrol, but I loved the original Teen Titans, and although it started off slow, they've earned my trust. I wasn't a huge fan of Young Justice season 3, but that was pretty decent as well. So Swamp Thing already had my attention before it even came out. And if you're a fan of horror or thrillers, then this is definitely the show for you. This is a pretty great horror show. I'm not one who gets scared a lot by horror films or horror shows or things of that nature, but it did have some pretty suspenseful moments, and I just wanted to show this opening intro because every time I see it, I fall in love with it again. It reminds me so much of the Justice League Unlimited intro from the animated series back in the day, and if you tell me it doesn't, just look at these two images and just tell me you don't see the comparisons. But Swamp Thing episode 1 opens up in the nearby swamp, and we have these three men on a boat, and they're on a mission to take this mutated growth supplement, and they're dumping it off into the swamp, and that's causing a whole bunch of growth with the green. And I'm not completely familiar with the Swamp Thing comics or the lore of the character, but this opening sequence was really gruesome and very graphic and gory, but I was kind of expecting this because the DC films, especially the live action films, have been very adult and very grotesque. But I must say, coming into this, I did not know that this was an origin story. I was very unaware of how graphic and how crazy it would be getting off the bat. But we then get this opening intro, and in the opening intro, I want to break down a few things quickly. There's this girl falling into the water in opening intro, and that's actually hinted at later in the car. And it seems to be that it's going to be a suicide by Abby Arcane's character, who's played by Crystal Reeds. But her best friend is actually the daughter of the Sutherlands, who we end up meeting later on in the TV show. And I'm just going to get through this really fast because I don't even want to spend 15 or more minutes going over this. So, Mariah and Avery Sutherland are there, but in this next part of the opening intro, we see a skull underneath a boat, which I'm assuming is the green, and the damage that's being caused to the green by humans. And as you can see here, from this opening sequence in the episode, there were these three dots around, which I'm assuming were the bombs. Later on, we get a scene where they're at a rally. They have an open meeting where they're talking about what's going on in the swamp, and all these people are fighting for the swamp, and they love the swamp. The swamp's been providing for them, and this is the first time we really get to see Avery Sutherland, and he is like, man, I don't know what it is with these DC villains, but I was getting complete Lex Luthor vibes from him the entire time. Let me know down in the comments if you agree or disagree, but it's just my opinion on the character. But moving on, we get this, we see this leaving Mariah town sign, and that's obviously for the town that Abby's from. And so I'm assuming that's just going to be a big part of her backstory. We'll probably learn later on in the season. But then we get this shot of the house, which is actually the home of Alec Holland, who we find out later in the show is Swamp Thing. And again, I haven't read any of the comics, or I don't know much about the lore of Swamp Thing. So no, I did not know that he was Swamp Thing the entire time. But then quickly we get these two shots here. I won't break them down. I'll break them down in a future video probably because they weren't really relevant to this episode. But just quickly here, we see this shot here, and I just thought it was funny how it was real reminiscent of the birth of Swamp Thing. Later on, I'll get into that in just a little bit. But that's about it for the opening intro. The show picks up 48 hours after the incident that opened up the show before the opening intro. And right here, we actually get a scene with the daughter of one of the victims from the swamp incident. And she's coughing and has blood coming down her nose. And I originally thought that this may be like a telepathic connection thing. So I don't know. I thought it was like telepathically moved around, or it might be something that, like, if you're related to someone and it happens to them, that might cause it. But that's kind of debunked later when we see Abby find this leaf or just a little bit of mossy shit or whatever that is from her house, which we see a little bit later when they go to the home. And yes, this is definitely her home. This is the house of Eddie Coyle, who was one of the men who went missing. And I just want to give a huge warning right now. If you don't want to see any gruesome or any really any really graphic stuff, I'm going to warn you right now. Go ahead and skip to the part in the video with the red light. I'll leave something up to tell you exactly what time, but I have this exact same red light coming up after all the graphicness. But if you're still here, this is some of the graphic nature that was going on. And as you can see, the show definitely doesn't shy back. We were able to see that this is why the daughter got sick, because her dad is just sitting there growing and spreading through the house from the bathroom. And it's still growing, it's still moving, as you see here, breaking the glass. And even later when she's doing an autopsy on it, and they get some of his DNA and they start hitting it with the growth hormone, he starts growing, and it actually activates him, and it starts growing out of him, and it's so graphic and disgusting. But this is connected to her, so the green, I'm assuming, is connected to all living people who are infected. But that's it for me for anything extremely graphic. There will be a little bit more graphic content coming up, so I just want to give you guys a fair warning for that. But it isn't anything too crazy from here on out. For those of you who skipped the gruesome part, I was talking about how patient 0 was involved, and that was actually the reason Abby was called to Marai, Louisiana, away from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where she was at. And here she was actually working with the CDC, who I don't know anything about the organization. Let me know if you know anything about them down in the comments below. I'm not too familiar if they've shown up in another DC property in the DC streaming universe or not. But apparently they're pretty high up in the government, because she comes back to Marai, or they call her into Marai for this special case with patient 0, and she has basically full say over everyone in the hospital it's looking at. But here's where she's looking at the sample, and this is actually the first time that she runs into Alec Holland. And yeah, this is our first introduction to Alec Holland, and I had no idea he was Swamp Thing. Andy Bean, I believe is his name, does an amazing job with the character. We find out later on in the episode that he's stripped of his scholarship, and he committed fraud on his research findings. And he does say that he still stands behind his findings, so he does believe what he found. He couldn't replicate what he found to give evidence to it. But I don't know how I didn't get it that he was Swamp Thing, especially because I knew it was a mad scientist kind of story, not a mad scientist. But we see him here getting pushed out by the nurse saying, "You're not supposed to be here." And then later on, we see him at Eddie Coyle's house, scraping up residue and everything. And he does look like he's fighting for the good of the swamp and everything like that. So I'm honestly kind of surprised I didn't catch on to it earlier, even though I did say I was coming into this kind of ignorant and bliss and not knowing what's going on. I didn't even watch the trailer they released for it. But then we go back to his place. And here is actually where we find out about all the research he's been conducting on the growth hormone, or the growth mutation hormone, or whatever you want to call it. But he does have a pretty shaggy, pretty nice lab in his little cabin or whatever. He's being funded, as we find out, by Mr. Sutherland. But right here, if you see the clear liquid is the swamp water. The thicker, more orange liquid, which you can see is more than half of the liquid there, isn't supposed to be in the swamp. And this is something he got directly from the swamp. So as you can see, when he puts just a drop of this into some moss, it immediately starts mutating, and it's very sporadic and very quick, and it fills up very quickly, and they have to kill it and put it out before it gets too hectic or everything. But we even see later on when they put it into a blood sample, and that is what leads to some of the gruesome, crazy content that we saw earlier. But the growth hormone works very quickly, and it does seem like it's going to be a very lethal and very dangerous drug that's out there, or whatever it is. But going ahead and making my prediction now, I'm going to go ahead and say Mr. Sutherland is the big bad of the episode of the series. I'm not too sure about Mrs. Sutherland. I do still kind of feel iffy about her, but we know for a fact that Mr. Sutherland, Avery, hired Alec Holland, and I'm assuming he hired him because he knew that a discredited scientist who had all of this public stuff going on, if he did find out what he was doing in the swamp, no one would really believe him. But knowing how smart this guy is, he also wants to keep him along and have him looking into things so that if anyone would see anything, he can report back to him and let him know that things are becoming a bit more obvious. But I'm not very sure how I feel about Mrs. Sutherland. We do get a scene in the bar with her and Crystal Reed's Abby when we find out that she blames Abby for her daughter's death, and even Abby says towards the end of the episode that she killed her best friend 2 days before her graduation. But this scene right here is just a great showing of Crystal Reed's character, who is Abby. It's just a great showing of her portrayal of the character and how invested she is, and she portrays the emotions on her face beautifully. She played a more shallow and cold character in Gotham, which I remember her from, but even in that she was amazing. But again, just skipping through some of this to keep the video short. They find out in the swamp that there's more packages that are dispersing the growth hormone into the swamp. So after they share one last drink, and yeah, this really is for them one last drink, at least as they are now. Alec Holland goes ahead to get the rest of the growth hormone packages that are in the swamp, and this is the part where I realized that this may be Swamp Thing and this may be an origin story. And even in this moment, it looked like the character Andy Bean, the actor Andy Bean, was looking at me as a fourth wall break, saying, "You figured it out." We then get Alec in the swamp retrieving the last of the growth hormone packages, and if you look at the monitor that's on this boat, it looks like he got all of them, because if you remember in the beginning of the episode, it was the exact same monitor that we saw with the same pinpoint, which I'm assuming is the green, but it was surrounded by 3 red dots. So now there's 0 red dots on the monitor, which I'm assuming are the growth hormones. So now that they're gone, he did get them out of the swamp. So that's great. Kudos to him. It kind of sucks because the guy who found him doing this wasn't as happy as we were and as he was. And he actually shoots him not once, but he shoots him twice, right in the stomach and right in the chest. And if that wasn't enough, in true comic book fashion, he blows up the boat. And that is the end of Alec Holland and the end of Swamp Thing. The end. No, of course not. That's not the end. This is just episode 1, and we got a bunch of this. We got the whole season to go. Yes, Alec Holland, after being shot, actually jumps out of the boat before its explosion, and he's taken in by the swamp. He's taken in by the green pull him underwater. I'm not sure here if it was going inside of him or taking over him, just going over top of him, or just fully infusing with him. But this is where we got the creation of Swamp Thing. So I really love this show. I think you guys should definitely watch it, check it out. If you loved my video, please leave me a like. Go ahead and comment down below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell for notifications. And stay tuned for more upcoming videos.